Every UFC weight class has had its share of highs and lows, but few tenures have been more volatile than its often maligned flyweight class. Today, we look at the history of the UFC's red-headed stepchild, and how it went from the company's chopping block to pay-per-view main events. Welcome to the INC, and today we ask, who saved the flyweight division? Before looking at flyweight's resurgence, it's important to remember how it got itself into trouble in the first place. Flyweight's origins can be traced back to 2009, when WEC explored the option of opening 125, only for the company to be merged with the UFC, forcing names like Demetrius Johnson and Joe Benavidez to compete at bantamweights despite a considerable size disadvantage. In 2012, the company reopened talks about introducing flyweight to the fold, intending for the division to serve as a TV-only card to support their new TV deal with Fox. A four-man tournament was held to crown the company's inaugural champion, with Johnson besting Benavidez by split decision at UFC 152. The division's early years were centered on Johnson. Between 2012 and 2018, the former construction worker became one of the most dominant fighters in the sport, besting all comers with his mix of elusive movement and grappling prowess, beating the likes of John Dodson, Kyoji Horiguchi, and a second win over Benavidez. Johnson's dominance saw him considered the pound-for-pound best fighter in the world, and in 2017 broke Anderson Silva's record for the most title defenses in UFC history. While Johnson basked in the respect of his peers, it was far from smooth sailing behind the scenes. Despite being revered by hardcore fans, Johnson struggled to attract an audience to his fights, with his quiet persona and stigma around flyweight fighters proving a turnoff for casual fans. With the largest gate of 200,000 buys, Johnson is regarded as one of the worst drawing champions in company history, a blemish some would hold against him throughout his UFC run. Another issue stemmed from the scale of Johnson's dominance. Johnson's willingness to fight every 4 months left the UFC short of fresh title contenders, with company bosses resorting to low-ranked contenders or rising prospects unready for such a big match. This culminated in Season 24 of The Ultimate Fighter, where 16 regional flyweight champions competed for a shot at Johnson's belt. While Tim Elliott proved victorious, the show provided a showcase for the next batch of flyweight stars, with Brandon Moreno, Alexandre Pantoja, and Kai Kara-France making their mainstream debut in the season. The ill feeling between Johnson and the UFC came to a head in 2017, when former bantamweight champion TJ Dillashaw expressed interest in challenging Johnson for his belt, only for Johnson to turn down the fight due to his belief TJ couldn't safely make the weight. The snub led to a backlash from company president Dana White, with Johnson later revealing the company threatened to shut down the division if he refused to accept the Dillashaw bout.
Either TJ or we close the flyweight division. And I said, close the division then. Because if somebody's willing to do that, that just shows you that they have no interest whatsoever of working with the champion. You're saying that we don't bring excitement to the UFC, our division's not making money. I like to disagree. I think our division is making money and people are excited to see our division.
Amid much internal pressure, Johnson returned to action against Henry Cejudo at UFC 227. Johnson had bested Cejudo when the two men first met in 2016, but with Cejudo making big strides in his striking, many believed he would be Johnson's toughest threat for several years. What followed was one of the best title fights of the year, as Johnson and Cejudo traded blows in a battle of momentum shifts and takedown attempts. Despite Cejudo's best efforts, most believed Johnson had done enough to see off his latest challenger. The cage side judges, however, thought otherwise. Unbeknownst to those at the time, the fight would be Johnson's last for the UFC, as 2 months after the fight, the former champion was traded to ONE Championship in a swap deal for unbeaten welterweight Ben Askren. Johnson would go on to become ONE Flyweight champion, and has expressed little interest in returning to the UFC. With Johnson out of the picture, the UFC were free to push ahead with Dillashaw's move to flyweight, with the fighter having regained his bantamweight crown by beating Cody Garbrandt at UFC 217. Behind the scenes, however, flyweight was in a state of flux. In November 2018, flyweight fighter Shorty Torres announced he'd been released by the promotion despite having multiple fights left on his contract, with several others, including future champ Moreno, following suit in the coming weeks. The flyweight Cole placed a focus on Cejudo's match with Dillashaw, with many believing the UFC wanted a Dillashaw win to justify closing the weight class.
I always tell people all the time, if you're gonna throw the Hail Mary to somebody, throw it to me. Because I care about this division. I care about what what it has to offer for the future of our weight class. Not just me, but everybody and their mama, literally.
Cejudo's match with Dillashaw took place in the main event of Fight Night Brooklyn, the first headliner of the company's new deal with ESPN. With the division's fate on his shoulders, Cejudo knew he needed to make a statement and did so in emphatic fashion.
Oh, he got him! Big right hand from Cejudo! Finish him! Cejudo's got him! Oh, he got him!
Cejudo took just 36 seconds to finish the bantamweight king, and while some placed an asterisk due to Dillashaw's depleted state, the win was enough to stave off the UFC's execution. Dillashaw's embarrassment was worsened when he failed a pre-fight drug test for EPO, stripping him of his bantamweight title in the process. Ironically, Dillashaw's loss was Cejudo's gain, beating Marlon Moraes at UFC 238 to become the company's fourth double champion. Accompanied by his new trash-talking persona, Cejudo had become one of the sport's biggest names, and permanently silenced the question over the UFC shutting down 125. While Cejudo vacated his belt to commit to bantamweight, his achievements led to an influx of fresh talent, with Askar Askarov, Brandon Royval, and a returning Brandon Moreno making their debuts over the coming months. The biggest star, however, was Deiveson Figueiredo. The God of War entered the promotion unbeaten in his first 11 fights, boasting huge knockout power unlike anything seen in the division. The UFC saw Figueiredo as the ideal man to carry on Flyweight's momentum, and after losing his first shot due to a botched weight cut, the Brazilian took on Joe Benavidez for the vacant title at UFC Fight Island. The match became one of the most one-sided title fights in recent history, as Figueiredo dropped Benavidez 3 times before finishing him by first-round submission, a fight that served as a changing of the guard at 125. The UFC attempted to capitalize on Figueiredo's newfound stock, and in November 2020, the fighter was booked for his first title defense at UFC 255, the first time the flyweights had headlined a pay-per-view in 5 years. Originally, Figueiredo was set to face former bantamweight champion Cody Garbrandt, who had announced his intention to move to flyweight after a highlight reel KO of Rafael Assunção. But after Garbrandt was forced to withdraw due to COVID-19 restrictions, the call instead went to Contender Series alum Alex Perez. Figueiredo would make easy work of Perez, capitalizing on an early scramble to submit the Californian in under 2 minutes. That same night, Brandon Moreno defeated Brandon Royval to extend a 5-fight unbeaten streak. What followed was a stroke of fortune that transformed both men's careers. UFC 256 was set to be headlined by Peter Yan's title match with Aljamain Sterling, but 4 weeks before the bout, the Russian was forced to withdraw due to visa issues. With both men still fresh after their recent outings, Figueiredo and Moreno were offered the chance to headline the card, making the Brazilian the first man to headline back-to-back pay-per-views since Tito Ortiz in 2001. Most expected Figgy to steamroll Moreno in a similar straightforward fashion. Instead, the Mexican showed insane durability to pull the champion into deep waters, the two men engaging in a back-and-forth brawl considered one of the best matches of the year. Despite Figgy being penalized for an illegal strike in the 3rd round, Figueiredo held on for a majority draw, retaining his title as the incumbent champion. The two men would be inseparable for the next 2 years, embarking in a pair of high-octane bouts matching the drama of their first meeting. Figueiredo would finally best his Mexican rival in a close-fought contest at UFC 270, but not before Moreno upset the apple cart with a striking masterclass 6 months earlier, becoming Mexico's first UFC champion 3 years after being released by the promotion. Despite their trilogy being over, the closeness of the bouts left many considering the rivalry unresolved. And after Brandon Moreno beat Kai Kara France for the interim flyweight title, a 4th match between the two was scheduled for UFC 283. marking the first quadrilogy in UFC history. Flyweight's rivalry can be considered one of MMA's feel-good stories, a division on the verge of extinction saved by the quality talent demonstrated to keep it afloat, and finally winning over the fans and company brass turned off by their small stature. Flyweight can be served as a lesson for the UFC. With the right marketing, matchmaking, and top talent, any division can become a worthy and integral part of the UFC. Okay, we might be pushing it there. This is the INC. Please like, share, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss a video.